men on the part of the Raja Fateh Purgash of Nahun and his sisters, the widows of the late Raja Karakchand, are always plotting to disturb my country, that Moti Ram of Nahun and Bisum Singh, son of Sansaru, the agents of the Rani, Bisun Singh, son of Sansaru, agents of the Rani, have repaired to Nandpur Mukhowal, have united with the Sodis there to take my fort of Kote Kalur in that vicinity. That ammunition and money is supplied by the Raja of Nahun, who has also dispatched his agents towards Kangra in the Punjab hills to enlist troops, and that the Raja, who was once himself the suitor for the hand of the late Raja Karakchand, sister, has now promised her to the Sukhet chief if he will cooperate with him in raising disturbances in my country. That is a quote by the desperate Jangi Jagat Chand in a confidential letter through a personal advisor, talking about the multiple threats facing his regime. Within a fortnight, Bilaspur was on the verge of anarchy. This is from the book by Arik Moran, Amsterdam University Press. Oh, by the way, Rembrandt was also on show recently, sponsored by the British, and he looks like a Buddha. If you look at Rembrandt, happy Dharma Chakra Day, and I want to watch her documentary about Rembrandt later after I finish this read. The means employed by the Sirmori royals were remarkable by any standard, from the divisionary tactics that surrounded the succession to the mysterious birth of an heir. This has a mirror, by the way. The heir to Karakchand by the twin widows. Mysterious birth of the heir from one of the twin sisters through the dispatching of secret agents to infiltrate and stir rebellion in Bilaspur, to alliances with armed groups both within and outside of the kingdom, and the pact with the distinguished leader of Sukhet through marriage. Fateh Prakash and his sisters exploited every possible channel to ensure their success. Just lyrics, hi. This is history in 1839. By the way, today I got a quarter that said British surrender. I didn't know that quarter existed, but anyways. Yeah, the British surrendered one day, I guess, so it's an important date. Consider the enlistment of the erstwhile Wazir Bishnu Singh Chandel. Although ousted from his hereditary role by the Mians in 1832, Bishnu remained closely linked to the court, becoming the influential favorite of the elder Sirmori Rani, who used his diplomatic know-how to effect calculated takeover of the kingdom. The former wazir thus concluded pacts with several of the late Raja's retainers, including the Rohilla cavalry, the Sodis of Anandpur, and peasant warriors from the loosely regulated northern part of the kingdom, specifically the minuscule tract in the Kangra hills adjoining Bilaspur, where the North Indian military army was resurging after the death of the Maharaja Ranjit Singh. The marital alliances proposed to the ruler of Sukhet was related to these processes, since the late Karakchand had in fact borrowed 25,000 rupees from the latter to pay for his Pathan mercenaries. So Sodis are sometimes mistaken for Pathan, but that's another conversation. In offering the late ruler's sister in marriage, the Sirmori Ranis earned a powerful ally at Bilaspur's border on the northeasterly road to Mandi in Himachal Pradesh today, while compensating him for the earlier loss by attacking on multiple fronts. Their Samori attack brought Jagat Chand's Bilaspur to the brink of extinction. Alvin says hi. while Clerk would later attribute the impoverished country's collapse to the prodigal, tyrannical, and reckless legacy of Kharchand. His limited understanding of its politics was in no small part responsible for this outcome. In the 6 months that had passed since the Dalyan became Raja, the Admiria Mians failed miserably in delivering on their earlier promises. Oh, the glasses are not on. Miserably failed in delivering on their earlier promises to rebuild the state. Inebriated with newfound freedom, the late ruler's enemies fragmented the regime to an even greater extent by pursuing their individual interests. Metcalf to Thomason in Color Disturbances. There's an actual file in the archive about this. By the time the Ranis reached the capital, the Mians had all but dispersed, leaving the recently installed Jagat Chand at the mercy of the invaders. The only leader of note to support his cause was Raja Ram Saran of Handur, a member of the extended brotherhood of Chandela Rajputs. The Handuria was eager to preserve his hard-won supremacy and no doubt relished his dominance over the senior branch of the family that had been the cause of much suffering in his youth. At the same time, the aging Raja had several reasons to hesitate to interfere on Jagat Chand's behalf. For one, the overlap between the Chandela state's territories and Handur's joint border with Baghal, whence the Sirmori forces were expected to arrive, would have exposed his subjects to attacks. Second, despite their differences over the succession, Ram Saran professed the most perfect friendship with the ruler of Nahan, which had been ratified in his son and heir's marriage to the latter's full sister in 1832. Were the Handuria to side with Bilaspur against Sirmar, he would have been forced into a confrontation with his daughter-in-law's sister, and consequently jeopardize his relationship with Nahan. Finally, the youthful warrior king who had ruled supreme over the hills south of Sutlej at the turn of the century was a far cry from the melancholy old man he had become by 1840. Lacking in energy and devoid of access to the inner workings of the court, the Handuria was in no position to counter the Sirmori royals' maneuvers. By leaving the arena open for contestation, the Handuria enabled the last full-blown war between Pahari leaders to take place, in which he was also destined to take a part. Thanks for the hearts. Thanks, Satin Suit, for encouraging. The conquest and its outcomes. As if defying a quarter century of British rule, the Himalayan frontier was ablaze with old world politics in the winter of 1839 to 40. Departing from their mountainous abode with 1,000 warriors in December, the Sirmori sisters marched through the mountains into northern Bilaspur, where they joined warrior peasants from the Kangra hill who had gathered there beforehand. The joined armies then marched south to capture the Chandela's ancestral fort of Kot Kalur, earning legitimacy for their endeavor. With the country's northern part subdued and southerly tracts surrounding Mokhawal secured by their Soti allies, the Rani sent a letter to Lahore reporting their position alongside the Nazrana cash tribute expected of a subject state. There's a new song by Kuldeep Sharma, also called Nazrana. I didn't know this was the English word for it. English word meant cash tribute, customary cash tribute. So like if you're subject to another Indian royal state, you are expected to pay up. While receipt of the letter and tribute were acknowledged through the issuing of a farman, an official recognition of sovereignty in the form of a sanad failed to materialize. The Ranis nonetheless proceeded to recruit the kingdom's peasant by assuring them of having secured the support of Lahore and pressed on the conquest of Bilaspur's remaining tracts south of the river. Back in the capital, Jagat Chand made a futile attempt to rally his Ajmeria kinsmen to counter the attack that culminated in his solitary flight south to Handur. Negotiating a deal with his host, the refugee king was granted a fighting force under the Handuria's cousin in exchange for 2 forts on the Handur-Bilaspur border. most likely Ratnapur and the fort overlooking the southern point of entry at Swargat, its eyes set on the strategic Kotdar. The replenished army marched towards Bilaspur, encountering the fortified Sodhis on a parallel ridge south of the Sutlej. The riposte was short-lived. In the battle that ensued at the hilltop pilgrimage site of Naina Devi, the Handuri commander was killed and his soldiers quickly disbanded. With Jagat Chand twice beaten, the Rani's popularity soared to new heights, setting the stage for the decisive invasion of the kingdom's central valley. Within days, the conquest of Bilaspur was complete. Embroiled in Afghan affairs and the frenzy of diplomatic activity spurred by the interregnum in Lahore, so the Maharaja just passed, the political agent at Ambala greeted the news of Bilaspur's fall with dismay, hastily writing to demand an explanation from the Ranis. The multitasking agent with Lahore assembled an army and stormed Bilaspur to reinstate Jagat Chand as ruler. Although the details of this attack are missing from most sources, the petition filed by the Simori Rani some 2 months later paint a violent picture of means used to crush the widow's regime, having reclaimed the kingdom from those who had evil charms. The Ranis had barely settled into power before the unlawful successor returned to the capital, Mian Junga, with 2,000 strong army from the ancient enemy of Handur. Overcoming significant popular retaliation, the vengeful Raja forced the widows from their abode while performing acts of unimaginable cruelty towards their peers. The late Karak Chand's sister, once wooed by the Simoria and later promised to rule Suket, was cuffed and chained in the fort of Ratnapur, while the aged queen mother, Guleri, wife of Mahachand, was forced out of the palace and beaten in public. These grotesque acts of tyranny and oppression were supported and sanctioned by the East India Company, whose soldiers and officers joined in this revenge. They were ordered to leave the kingdom. They considered their natal kingdom home, and then Jagat Chand resumed the throne. So they went to Sirmaur, I guess. Over the next days, clerks stamped out the remaining pockets of resistance in the countryside, installed garrisons of Kaluri and Patiala warriors at key positions, and confronted the Sodhis on the range above Anandpur. Come spring, the kingdom on the Sutlej was regained, but at no trifling price. Entire villages had been burnt down, wells and ponds poisoned, and the prospect of future improvement under the respectable but not energetic Jagat Chand seemed very bleak, according to a report. Jagat Chand also owed 120,000 rupees to the Handuria for his assistance, which were repaid by levying a tax on the cultivators. Do you like mythology? I find the study quite interesting. Okay. The flurry of secret agents, furtive confidants, wayward international diplomacy, and fervent military market engaged by the agents' supposed allies in Sirmaur revealed a political reality that was remarkably congruous with the pre-colonial patterns of rule. The Rani's confidants thus hark back to the non-Rajput agents who facilitated the Gorkha conquest 2 decades earlier. The sanctioning of authority by Lahore recalled earlier alliances with Kathmandu 1803-15 and Calcutta from 1815, and the exchange of military support from Handur for forts persisted as it had through virtually every armed conflict since the Battle of Chinjar, 1795 to 1796. These seeming continuities were nonetheless adapted to the constraints of British rule and to the delineation of the imperial border along the Sutlej in particular. The warrior peasants who joined the Rani were for the most part recruited from beyond the river rather than from the interior of the British territory, with the collaboration of the Sodhis was similar enabled by their ambiguous standing with Lahore, the stealthy operations and coordination required to bring the Sirmaur Rani's plan to fruition display a degree of sophistication that surpassed most instances of inter-Pahari rivalry examined thus far, suggesting the Rajput elite had successfully adapted to its changing circumstances, even as it exposed the abysmal misunderstanding of the region and its leaders by those purporting to rule it. The political agents' failure to detect the plot in Bilaspur was embarrassing. Glossing over the coup, the chronicle conforms to the Indic register at the turn of the 20th century. So now the author is examining someone else's account of this history. Fateh Prakash concluded his career with a grand pilgrimage to Gaya and Varanasi in the plains. The Kaluri rival followed suit. After a decade of difficulties in power, Jagat Chand ceded his throne to his son in order to live out his remaining 7 years in Vrindavan and other holy places. So these events were often reduced to just another episode, but the author finds this very significant since they are real life heroines, and he even compares it to the Dogra Begum Samru 1753 to 1836, and she is also very interesting, and you can look up her biography if you have the interest to do so. Good night.